So, um, something I've been thinking about doing along with writing my blog is sometimes doing some videos, sharing my thoughts. Um, and the reason why is because sometimes it's just easier to share and not have to write out everything. However, I do typically prefer writing out my thoughts because I feel like I can express my ideas with more precision. I'm very concerned about the language I use, and I try to be very precise so I'm clear and there's no mistake. But then with that, it takes a little bit longer, and sometimes it's just easier to express what I'm thinking. And so, what I wanted to talk about a little bit today is the Asbury Revival that some of you may have heard about. Um, this revival happened in Kentucky at a small Christian college. And it happened about 2 to 3 weeks ago. It lasted for 2 weeks, I know that. Of and it was a period of unending prayer. And so revival, from I don't fully understand the distinction and the meaning of revival in evangelical circles. I guess a revival is one type of spiritual manifestation towards a group. I know there are other types, such as awakenings, and some people have argued this is more of awakening instead of revival. I don't really care what they call it. What I do know is that it is a group of people who claim to have been overcome by God, infused by His Spirit, experienced manifestations, His love, and it went on for 2 weeks. And what is notable about this whole thing is that it not only lasted for 2 weeks, but the amount of attention it received and those who arrived. And they came from all over the world to attend this revival. And many people felt impressed by the Spirit to do so. And so the reason why I bring this up is, as an LDS person, revival is not something we use in our terminology. Um, we have had solemn assemblies, we talk about that, general conference, things of that nature, but revival is different. And so I think for some of us, we may be like, well, what is going on? And I think for on a deeper level, I think we're probably maybe wondering like, well, is this legitimate? Because I think one thing that we may have a tendency to do is, because we believe we are the one true church, we may believe that God can only works through our church for His purposes. And I think what this reveals, this revival and this occurrence, is that maybe this isn't necessarily the case, and that God will work through whomever to share His message, or better expressed, to speak to them and to impact them. Um, and I think another thing it kind of reveals, and this is more of the core point, is this distinction between status and heart. Um, I think one of the dangerous things as members of the LDS Church that we can get into is we can believe that, well, because we are part of the true church, God is favoring us. And because we have a modern day prophet, God is with us. And everyone else is lost and they're confused and we know the way. But I don't know if that's necessarily true, because, and why I say necessarily is this key point, which is the heart. Because we can have all the oracles of God, the revelations, the ordinances, which would make us or allow us to draw closer to God. But if we are not converted to God within our hearts, it doesn't matter. And what this means is that God is concerned first and foremost with the heart. And this is what Jesus Christ was in His crosshairs during His ministry, was the false tradition among the Pharisees that because they descended from Abraham and because they were Jews, that God was going to redeem them. And that isn't correct, because God doesn't just want people, and he doesn't ask people just to do things for the sake of doing them. That is, he's not just wanting blind followers who will just obey him, whatever, in a sycophantic way. He wants people who are committed to him truly so he can use them for his purposes. And now, this using isn't like an abusive way, it is a loving way. God, who knows all things, who loves his children more than anything, needs servants to carry out his will. That is something the scriptures are pretty clear on, that God works through his servants and he uses them to help his people. But he needs his servants to be committed to him at all times, or otherwise it won't work. We see this example with Moses. Moses would have just said, yeah, no, I'm not, this whole thing about going back to Egypt, I'm not going to do it. What would have happened, right? God seemed to have prepared Moses for this purpose so he could deliver his people. And the most quintessential example is that of the Savior and his atonement. If Christ said, yeah, I'm not going to do that, where would we be? And what we realize is that God is trying to create a community of people who are committed to him, and so that he can use them for his purposes. But the other thing too about having a heart towards God is a heart of love and compassion and understanding of peace. That's one of the key signs that one has been born again, is how they treat their fellow men and the attitude they have towards them. And the reason why that's important is because God is trying to create a community of love. I mean, that's really it's that simple. God is trying to create a community of love, and to do that, he needs people's hearts, people who are committed to him, to serve him, to learn from him, because they don't know what is right and wrong, and they need God to show them, because by doing right, you bring about peace and harmony and order. Truth leads to order. Truth leads to peace when used properly. So that's the first component, right, is being taught. You need to surrender to God to be taught. But the second component is then also the love, and to exist in love. God can't create a society of peace and harmony if love isn't in the hearts. And so the first thing that God's always going to address is the heart. And what this Asbury Revival reveals is this fact. I don't necessarily know if it's true, and I probably need to come out and disclaim that I don't know, and I don't know if we'll fully know unless people know those who attended and can see how they've behaved after this experience and if they've become truly converted. I don't know, but what it does suggest the possibility of is, or at least should call us to realize, is that we should be less concerned about our status and more concerned about our heart and who we are to God and who we are in the inside and who we truly have become. What do we think about? What are our interests? What do we spend our time focusing on? Is it making money? Is it sports? Is it video games, entertainment? What's on our mind? What are the things that we care most about? What are the things that if God took from us would crush us and break us? Those questions kind of reveal who we are, really. I mean, we can say that we love God, we can say that we submit to his will, but then do we really? Or do we submit to his will when it's convenient for us? And so it seems like here that the Lord reached out his spirit. He saw people who were hungry and thirsting for his word, and he reached out to them and spoke to them in a way that they could understand. We know that from the Doctrine and Covenants, he speaks to us and communicates to us in our understanding. And so it wouldn't be surprising to me that the Lord would speak to these this group of people in a language they understand. They might not have the fullness of the gospel. They might not have the all the truths, and they have some false traditions in terms of understanding who God is and the nature of the universe. But they have a sincerity in their hearts to know God. Some of the people who share their experience and their challenges, a lot of them were Generation Z individuals who suffered from depression, anxiety, and they talked about how God helped them through it and that they needed this help and that they've been struggling. And so I think the point of this video is to serve as a reminder that God can work through anyone, and He will work through anyone. And there's no limits to who God will touch, who will inspire. And we ought to be humble in that. You ought to be humble instead of thinking, oh, well, I have a temple, have this calling, or I'm a member of the church and we have a prophet, so I'm good to go, is to maybe ask ourselves, well, if these people are having these experiences and I'm not, maybe they're closer to God than I am. And that's not to say that you're always going to have experience with God. Sometimes there are those dry spells, so to speak, where the Spirit isn't communicating and you have to walk through faith. It's not necessarily that simple, that it's just when you have spiritual manifestations, that means that's all there is, because you could be wandering for a period of time in the dark and be closer to God at that time than before. But nevertheless, I still think it is worthwhile to look and ask ourselves, are these experiences that these people are experiencing part of my life? I mean, they prayed constantly. The prayer went on for weeks. That's incredible. People came from all over, and they had experiences and manifestations of God's Spirit. And we ought to ask ourselves, do we have the same? Do we have those same experiences? And if not, maybe we aren't as close to the Father as we think. And that maybe we have allowed our status to serve as a placeholder to what we really need to do. And so I think that's kind of what I wanted to share, and just encourage everyone who listens to this video. I don't know how many will, but those who listen, to take that time to think about who they are, and just think about your daily life. How do you view people? Do you view others as means to an end, to further some sales goal, to further some business goal? Or do you see them as individuals with equal value, individuals who can teach you something, or you can teach them and help them? How do you treat those around you? How do you treat your spouse, children, even those who you have conflicts with? Because that's where it really comes down to. Because if you can love your neighbor with the love that God has, then you're already not there, but you are the type of person that God can work with. You are the type of person that will not turn heaven into hell. I remember reading a quote by Joseph Smith. This is it's 9:30 and my brain's about dead, but I don't know how I'll fully remember it. But it basically says, like, Joseph Smith says that he doesn't care. I mean, he doesn't care about the man who curses as long as his arm, as long as he has love towards his neighbor. That's what matters most. And I think sometimes we get hung up on word of wisdom. We get hung up on the language of someone or their belief system, and instead of realizing that what God cares most about is love and who we are in our heart. And a person who is loving and who is touched by the Spirit, that's the person that bears the image of God, because that's who God is. He is completely love in every way, and He wants others to realize that. But because of the veil and because of unbelief, they can't walk into His presence and behold that. And if they did, they would also probably die because their conscience would just condemn them. And so He asked for us to serve as proxies, to serve on His behalf, as maybe even agents of His love. That our actions of love will show to others who God is. That is, God, people will see God through us. And they'll say, hey, Aaron is a really nice guy. He's loving. I've never seen anything like that. And that must be who God is. And that's what God has always tried to do. And that's what He did with the Israelites. Except they forgot the message. And they thought that it was their status. And they thought it was because they had a temple that's all that mattered. But God was trying to use the Israelite kingdom to serve as an example to the rest of the Gentile nations. And that by representing God's love and righteousness, they would be a light to the other nations, and the other nations would say and see that light and want to join it. So with this video, I think, again, the key point is, what happened at Asbury is really cool, and I hope it was authentic and genuine, and I hope those in attendance have been touched by the Spirit and will be better people for it, and those who have struggled will be helped. And also as a reminder to us is to let go of our status and go inward to our heart and look at who we are and go to the Lord and ask what we need to do to become like Him so that we can be filled with His love and share that love to others.